what is the United Nations going to do? And the answer is they can't do anything. In the ancient world, Socrates, of all people, said that he was not a citizen of Athens alone. He was a citizen of the world. Our term cosmopolitan comes from that concept, that he had affinities with all the city-states and indeed with all the people in the world. In a very cynical fashion, when Alexander the Great in the latter 4th century BC, at the demise of the city-state, went into Asia Minor and then on to conquer the Persian Empire, he needed a propaganda talking point, and one of it was he was going to usher in what he called the brotherhood of man, a new ecumenical idea that whether you were Persian or Greek, you were a human. It sounds wonderful, but the idea was that enlightened rulers from the Hellenic world would spread their superior civilization all over the world, and it didn't last very well. In Roman times, Romans being far more practical, they didn't talk about globalization as much as reified it. They made it concrete. But immediately there were voices within Rome that said the further a sovereign nation expands and globalizes, the more difficult it is to maintain the solidarity of the people, the purity of the original founding concepts. The more we think we're making people into Romans, the more they think they are making us into other peoples other than Romans. One of the problems that globalists or cosmopolitans learned very early in the 20th century during the progressive movement was when you surrender sovereignty to these international bodies, then who is the police? Who polices the police? So the League of Nations, which was envisioned under Woodrow Wilson's Versailles agenda, for a very brief time seemed to be successful in adjudicating international disputes of trade or jurisdiction or borders until Adolf Hitler or the Japanese militarist or Joseph Stalin said, I don't need to listen to you. And so World War II doomed the first incarnation of a united group of nations, the League of Nations. After World War II, the same suspicious idea resurfaced with the United Nations. But this time we were going to have a Security Council, and they were going to be the world's top powers, the strongest, the most successful. And then they could be the enforcer. But the problem, of course, was that very early on, the Soviet Union was not the solution to the problem, but it was the problem itself. Because there's always going to be some country who's powerful by breaking the rules and going beyond its own prerogative. In other words, an anti-democratic China that has currently 1.5 million people in camps, and yet they're on the United Nations, and they're a citizen of the world. And if the United Nations would decide that the Chinese, contrary to the UN Charter, are putting people in concentration camps, or they're harvesting organs from people deemed not necessary, or they're forcing people to have abortions that don't fit their idea of family planning, or they're bullying their neighbors, or they illegally created a base in the Spratly Islands, what is the United Nations going to do? And the answer is they can't do anything. In 2020, we saw an international pandemic, and our United Nations Charter Medical Organization, the World Health Organization, warned us from the very beginning, do not issue a travel ban against China. And then we learned that the World Health Organization was essentially parroting or mimicking what China wanted. And why did they do that? Because of Chinese money and Chinese pressure. This is not an aberration. It's inherent in the idea of global governance that there is always going to be strong powers who have agendas that are not global in scope, but they're national and sovereign. But if all the other countries in the world surrender their sovereignty and one powerful nation doesn't, then they have to come up with a mechanism of collective defense. And so far in the history of man, that's never worked.